Part 1. The Purchase. The New England sun warmed the air gently, but it couldn't dispel the smell of antiquity that hung over the antique fair. The town of Harbor Creek, known for its colonial homes and picturesque bay, was hosting its annual antique fair today. For Sarah and Daniel, young Bostonians who had recently purchased an old Victorian house on the edge of Harbor Creek, it was an opportunity to find something unique that would add character to their new home. Sarah, her blonde hair pulled back into a messy bun, and her bright green eyes alight with enthusiasm, walked ahead, pausing occasionally at interesting items. Daniel, taller than her, with cropped dark hair and a thoughtful look, walked beside her, smiling at her admiration. He was an engineer, practical and a bit skeptical, but he loved history, and the old house, while demanding a lot of work, gave him a sense of belonging to the past. "Oh, Daniel, look at that old sewing machine!" Sarah exclaimed, pointing to the bulky metal object. "It looks like it belongs in a museum." "And it probably weighs as much as a small car," Daniel joked. "We barely pulled our sofa, remember?" Sarah laughed. "Yeah, you're right. We need something smaller, and maybe something for the living room, something that really draws attention." They wandered through rows of antique furniture, faded paintings, boxes of books whose pages smelled of time. Each object had its own story, its own silent tale of the past. Sarah imagined what these things might have looked like in their original homes, who used them, what conversations they might have heard. The air grew a little cooler as they entered the old barn's canopy. There was less light here, and the objects seemed even more mysterious. Amidst the pile of junk, broken chairs, old chests, dusty lamps, a large antique object standing against the far wall caught their attention. It was a mirror. Not just any mirror, but a true work of art, albeit one that had been neglected by time. Its frame was massive, carved of dark wood that seemed to absorb the light. The carving was intricate, with motifs that resembled intertwined branches, or perhaps symbols of some kind. But the strangest thing was the glass. It wasn't clear and shiny like an ordinary mirror. It had a deep, almost black hue, and the reflection in it was dim, as if covered in a haze. "Look, Daniel," Sarah whispered, as if afraid to break the silence around the mirror. Her voice was filled with admiration, mixed with a hint of fear. Daniel moved closer. He ran his hand over the cold, rough surface of the frame. "Wow, how big! I've never seen a mirror with glass like that." They stood before him, looking at their reflections. Their faces in the dark glass looked paler, and the shadows seemed deeper than they really were. It was a strange feeling, as if they were looking not at themselves, but at someone else standing in their place. "It would fit perfectly over the fireplace in the living room," Sarah said dreamily. "Imagine what it would look like there." "It's very heavy, Sarah," Daniel remarked, trying to lift one edge. "We can hardly carry it ourselves." At that moment, the salesman approached them. He was an old man, with a face like a dried apple and eyes that seemed to see too much. He was dressed in a worn shirt and jeans, and an old baseball cap sat on his head. "Are you interested in this mirror?" he asked in a husky voice, with a typical regional accent that reminded Sarah and Daniel of old times. "Yes, it is very unusual," Sarah replied. "The glass is so dark." The seller smiled, and there was something unpleasant in that smile, something that made Sarah feel a slight chill. "Ah, this mirror. It has a history, a very long history. It belonged to the Blackwood family, who lived in the old estate on the hill, ever since the days when there were only colonists here." Sarah and Daniel looked at each other. The Blackwood house was the same abandoned, gloomy estate that various rumors had circulated in the town. Some spoke of ghosts, others of tragic events that had happened there. "The Blackwood family. I've heard of them," Daniel said. "They say something terrible happened there." The salesman nodded. "Yes, it did. Many years ago. And this mirror, it stood in the living room of that house. They say it remembers everything it's seen, every face that's looked into it, every conversation, every scream. It's as if it holds echoes of the past." He fell silent, looking at the mirror with respect, but also with some hidden fear. His words sounded like an old legend, like a bedtime story, but there was something in his eyes that made Sarah believe him. It's just a legend, isn't it?" Sarah asked, trying to sound convincing, but her voice was shaking a little. "Maybe so, and maybe not," the salesman answered mysteriously. "Some things have a soul, a memory, and this mirror, it's seen a lot of grief, a lot of evil." He smiled again, and this time the smile was openly sinister. "But it's beautiful, isn't it? And it would be perfect for an old house, like yours." Sarah and Daniel looked at the mirror again. It seemed even darker, even more mysterious. They hesitated. The seller's words made them uneasy, but the desire to own such a unique object that seemed to breathe history was stronger. Besides, they were young, a little impudent, and they didn't believe in all these old superstitions. "We'll take it," Sarah said firmly, as if trying to convince herself. Daniel nodded, albeit with a slight hesitation. "Okay, how much?" "For you, a special price," the salesman said, naming an amount that was significantly lower than they had expected. This only increased their doubts, but they had already made up their minds. Daniel took out his wallet and handed over the money. The salesman took it, his fingers lingering for a moment on Daniel's hands. "Enjoy," he said, his eyes looking straight at Daniel. "And remember, it sees you. It always sees." He walked away, leaving Sarah and Daniel alone at the mirror. They stood in silence, staring into its dark glass. It felt strange, as if they had just purchased not just an object, but something living, something with a mind of its own. "A strange guy," Daniel said, trying to ease his tension. "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but the mirror, it really is beautiful." They arranged with the salesman for delivery. The weight of the mirror was considerable, and they could not cope with it alone. As they left the barn, Sarah looked back at the mirror. It seemed to her that something flashed for a moment in the dark glass, like a shadow. But she brushed the thought aside, writing it off as the play of light and her own imagination, stirred by the seller's stories. Little did they know that this purchase would be the beginning of a nightmare that would change their lives forever. The Harbor Creek mirror brought into their cozy new home an echo of the past that refused to remain silent.
Part 2. The New House and the Old Mirror. The old Victorian house on the outskirts of Harbor Creek stood on a small hill, surrounded by tall, ancient oaks and maples. Its dark green walls, white window frames, and steep roof with dormer windows gave it the appearance of a dignified but slightly gloomy patriarch. When Sarah and Daniel first saw it, they immediately felt a connection. The house was old, in need of repair, but had unsurpassed charm and potential. They dreamed of transforming it into a cozy nest filled with warmth and love. The mirror was delivered a few days after the fair. Two strong men carefully unloaded it from the truck, wrapped in a thick layer of protective film. Even through the film, its weight and monumentality were felt. Sarah and Daniel led them into the living room, a spacious room with high ceilings, large windows, and a striking stone fireplace above which they had planned to hang the mirror. Installing the mirror proved to be more difficult than they had thought. It was extremely heavy, and they had to use special fasteners, screwing them deep into the wall above the fireplace. When the film was removed, the mirror appeared in all its gloomy glory. The carved frame looked even more elegant in the daylight, but the dark glass still seemed strange. It didn't reflect light the way a regular mirror would, absorbing it like a black hole. "Wow," Sarah breathed, stepping back to get a better look at it. It's just incredible." "Yes, it really is impressive," Daniel agreed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I hope these fixtures hold up." They spent the rest of the day arranging the furniture in the living room, trying to create a cozy atmosphere. The mirror dominated the room, drawing eyes like a magnet. Even when they sat on the couch reading books, their eyes would involuntarily return to its dark surface. The first strange events began almost immediately. At first, they were small things that could be attributed to the old house, to fatigue, or to the play of the imagination. A slight creak in the empty rooms upstairs, a sudden sensation of cold running through the skin, even when the house was warm. Shadows that seemed too mobile in the corners of their vision. One evening when Sarah was home alone, Daniel had stayed late at work. She sat in the living room reading. It was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Suddenly, she heard a faint whisper, as if someone was calling her name. She lifted her head, looked around. No one. She put it down to the wind or the noise from the street. But the whisper came again, a little louder and closer this time. It seemed to be coming from the mirror. Sarah felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She stood up slowly and walked over to the mirror. In the dark glass, she saw her reflection, pale, with wide eyes. Over her shoulder, in the reflection, something flashed. A quick, indistinct shadow. Sarah turned sharply. Empty. Her heart was pounding. She felt panic starting to set in. She tried to rationalize. It was just an old house settling, the sounds spreading strangely. It was her imagination, stirred by the salesman's stories. She quickly dialed Daniel's number. "Hello," she said, trying to sound calm. "When will you be home?" "Hi, Sarah. Soon, in an hour, maybe less. Did something happen?" he asked, hearing the tension in her voice. "No, nothing," she lied. "I'm just bored. And it's a little quiet here." She didn't want to bother him. He had worked so hard for them to afford this house. She decided she was just tired and needed a break. But the strange things didn't stop. Daniel, though more skeptical, had begun to notice too. One morning, while shaving in the bathroom, he saw a quick movement behind his shoulders in the mirror hanging over the sink. He turned around and saw no one. Another time, while working at home, he felt as if someone was watching him. He would raise his head, but all he could see were empty rooms. The most disturbing incidents involved the large mirror in the living room. One evening, as they were both sitting on the couch watching a movie, they heard a soft moan that seemed to be coming from the mirror. The sound was so soft that they weren't sure if it was their imagination. But it came again, and this time they both heard it. It was the sound of deep, unbearable grief. They turned off the television. The silence grew loud. They sat listening. The moaning stopped. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. Daniel nodded. His face was pale. "Yes, what was that?" They looked at the mirror. Nothing was visible in its dark glass except their pale reflections. But they felt that something was there. Something hidden. Something breathing in the darkness of the glass. They began to discuss it. Daniel tried to find rational explanations. The old house, the ventilation problems, the noises from the street. But Sarah knew that was not the case. She felt that these events were connected to the mirror. "Do you remember what the salesman said?" she asked. "It remembers everything it has seen. It's like it holds echoes of the past." "Sarah, these are just old superstitions," Daniel said, trying to sound confident. "Don't let these stories influence you." "But what if these are not just stories?" she insisted. "What if there really is something in this mirror?" Their conversations became increasingly tense. Daniel didn't want to admit that anything supernatural was happening. Sarah couldn't ignore what she was feeling and seeing. A rift began to form between them, caused by fear and misunderstanding. One night, Sarah woke up from a nightmare. She had a dream about a mirror, and in its dark glass, she saw not her own face, but the face of a strange woman, pale, distorted with terror. The woman was reaching out to her, as if pleading for help, or perhaps trying to grab her. Sarah woke up, gasping, her heart pounding. She got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Daniel. She needed to see the mirror. She slowly descended the stairs and entered the living room. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight that filtered through the windows. The mirror on the wall looked even more gloomy in the darkness. Sarah walked up to it. She saw her reflection, but it was blurry, as if covered in a haze. And then she saw it. Not in her reflection, but in the depths of the glass. A faint movement. A shadow, separating from the darkness. It looked like a human figure, but without clear outlines. It moved slowly, smoothly, as if floating in dark water. Sarah stood, unable to move. Fear gripped her body. The figure approached the surface of the glass, becoming clearer. It was a face. The face of the woman from her nightmare. Her eyes were wide open, her mouth open in a silent scream. Sarah wanted to scream, but only a soft sob escaped her throat. She closed her eyes, afraid to look. When she opened them again, the figure was gone. The mirror was just dark glass, reflecting only her pale, frightened face. She quickly backed away from the mirror, tripping over the coffee table. She hurried back to the bedroom, crawling under the covers next to Daniel, trying to calm her trembling body. She didn't tell him what she had seen. She knew he would try to find a rational explanation, but she knew the truth. There was something in that mirror, something sinister. The next day, Sarah began researching the history of the Blackwood house. She visited the local library, talked to the elderly residents of the town. The information was fragmentary, intertwined with rumors and legends, but the overall picture was gloomy. The Blackwood family, especially Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, were known for their reclusiveness and strange behavior. There were rumors of quarrels, an accident that had happened to their young daughter, and that Mrs. Blackwood had gone mad after that. No one knew exactly what had happened, but the house had gained a bad reputation. After Mr. Blackwood's death, the estate had sat empty for many years, slowly falling into disrepair. Sarah had also found a reference to the mirror. There was an article about the Blackwood estate in an old local magazine that mentioned a large dark mirror in the drawing room, rumored to have strange powers. The article had no details, only hints of mystical properties. Sarah could feel the pieces of the puzzle beginning to come together. The mirror, the Blackwood house, the rumors of tragedy, the strange happenings in their own home. It all connected. She decided to tell Daniel about her findings. He listened carefully, but there was still skepticism in his eyes. "Sarah, these are all old stories," he said when she had finished. "People like to make up legends about old houses. It doesn't mean there's a ghost in the mirror." "But Daniel, you heard the moaning yourself. You saw a shadow in the bathroom," she insisted. "I heard something, yes," he admitted. "But it could have just been the noises of the house. And the shadow, maybe I imagined it." "What about the face in the mirror I saw last night?" she asked, daring to tell him her worst fear. Daniel paused for a moment. He looked at her, concern in his eyes. "Are you sure it wasn't just a dream, Sarah? You were scared." "I know what I saw, Daniel." Her voice rose. "It was there, in the mirror." Daniel sighed. He could see how scared she was, and it bothered him. But he still couldn't believe in the supernatural. "Okay," he said. "Let's try to find out more about this mirror. Maybe there's some explanation." They decided to research the history of the mirror and the Blackwood family together. They visited the town's historical society, looked through old newspapers, searched online archives. The more they learned, the darker the picture became. They found a mention of the tragic death of little Alice Blackwood, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. She was only 6 years old when she died of an unknown illness. After her death, Mrs. Blackwood became even more withdrawn and, according to rumors, began to talk to those who were in the mirror. Mr. Blackwood, unable to bear the grief and strange behavior of his wife, committed suicide a few years later. Mrs. Blackwood remained alone in the house until she died of old age, completely insane. The most disturbing discovery was an old photograph of the Blackwood living room. It showed a mirror on the wall, and in its reflection, although blurred, one could make out a little girl standing by the fireplace. Alice Blackwood. When Sarah and Daniel saw the photo, they felt a chill run down their spines. It was not just a play of light or an optical illusion. It was the clear reflection of a child in a mirror that, by all accounts, should have reflected only the living room. Daniel's skepticism began to crumble. He looked at the photograph, then at the mirror in their living room. The truth, terrible and incomprehensible, began to penetrate his consciousness. This is impossible," he whispered. "But it's here," Sarah said quietly, pointing to the photo. "There's something in this mirror, Daniel. Something about Alice Blackwood." They realized that the mirror didn't just reflect the past, it held it. It held the souls of those who had looked into it, who had suffered alongside it. And now that the mirror was in their house, those souls were beginning to manifest. The fear in their house grew with each passing day. The shadows grew bolder, the whispers louder. Sometimes they would see fleeting, vague images in the mirror. Faces, hands, something moving in the darkness. It was as if the mirror were a window into another world, a world inhabited by the ghosts of the past. They knew they couldn't ignore it any longer. They had to figure out what was happening before this something in the mirror swallowed them up completely. The next step was to find someone who could help them, someone who knew about such things, Someone who could explain what this mirror was and how they could get rid of it. Or perhaps how to help those trapped within its dark glass. This was just the beginning of their journey into the world of the supernatural. A world they never thought existed, and which had now become their terrifying reality.
Part 3. The Search for Answers. Sarah and Daniel's lives had become a constant state of anxiety. Every creak in the house, every unusual sound, made them shudder. Sleep became shallow and restless, haunted by nightmares about the dark mirror and the face in it. Even daylight could not dispel the feeling of the presence of something invisible, something watching them from the depths of the glass. Daniel, although he accepted the reality that something supernatural was happening, still tried to find a rational explanation. He investigated optical illusions, sonic phenomena, even tried to find information about possible hallucinations caused by old houses or stress. But none of these explanations could explain the photograph from the Blackwood estate, where Alice was visible in the mirror, or the clear images that Sarah saw in the dark glass. Sarah, on the other hand, immersed herself completely in her research. She felt that solving the mystery of the mirror was the only way to regain her peace. She spent hours in the local library, leafing through yellowed newspapers and historical documents. She talked to the old residents of Harbor Creek, listening to their stories and rumors about the Blackwood estate. One of the elderly women, Mrs. Henderson, whose family had lived in Harbor Creek for several generations, told Sarah about an old legend associated with the Blackwood mirror. According to her, the mirror was not just a piece of furniture, but a family heirloom that had been passed down from generation to generation. There was a belief that the mirror was created using a special technology, or perhaps even some form of magic that allowed it to remember images and events. Some said that this was due to the fact that the glass was made of some unusual material or processed in a special way. Mrs. Henderson also mentioned that the Blackwood family had connections to the occult, although this was only a rumor. She told of Mrs. Blackwood trying to contact her daughter after her death, using the mirror as a kind of portal. This information was disturbing, but it gave Sarah a direction. If the mirror was indeed connected to the occult or some form of magic, then they needed someone who understood such things, someone who could explain how it worked and perhaps how to counter it. Sarah began to research the paranormal, searching forums, books, and websites devoted to the subject. She read about ghosts, energy trails, portals, and various methods of protection. Much of the information seemed dubious to her, but she was looking for any clue that might lead them on the right path. One evening, while browsing an old forum devoted to mystical places in New England, Sarah came across a discussion of the Blackwood house. Someone mentioned a local paranormal investigator who had once been interested in the house. His name was Dr. Edward Campbell. Sarah found his contact information. Dr. Campbell turned out to be an elderly man, a former history professor, who after retirement had devoted himself to the study of the paranormal, combining a scientific approach with an openness to the unknown. He had written several books on the subject and was known for his caution and refusal to make sensational claims. Sarah wrote him an email detailing their situation, the purchase of the mirror, the strange happenings in the house, their research into the Blackwoods' history, and the photo of Alice in the mirror. She felt he was their only chance. The next day, the answer came. Dr. Campbell showed considerable interest in their story. He wrote that he had indeed researched the Blackwoods' house many years ago, but had never been able to solve its mystery. He also mentioned the mirror, noting that it had always given him a strange feeling. He suggested that they meet. Sarah and Daniel were relieved to accept his offer. They arranged to meet the following week. The anticipation was intense. They hoped that Dr. Campbell would be able to shed light on what was happening and perhaps offer a solution. Meanwhile, the activity in the house was increasing. Now they could not only hear whispers and moans, but also see clearer images in the mirror. They were fleeting flashes, like frames from an old movie, a face appearing and disappearing, hands reaching out from the darkness, shadows moving behind their backs. One evening, as Daniel sat in the living room looking at the mirror, he saw not his own reflection, but the reflection of another person. It was a man in old clothes with a pale, haggard face. He was standing by the fireplace, looking straight at Daniel. His gaze was filled with despair and pain. It was so realistic that Daniel held his breath. The man's face slowly contorted, as if in intense pain, and disappeared, leaving only the dark glass. Daniel felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. This was no longer just an imagination or a play of light. This was something real. He knew Sarah was right. There really was something in this mirror. The tension between Sarah and Daniel grew. Fear affected their relationship. They argued over little things, were irritable, couldn't sleep. Daniel still tried to maintain a semblance of normality, going to work, meeting friends. But Sarah was absorbed in the mirror. She hardly left the house, spending time in the living room, watching the mirror, looking for answers. Finally, the day came to meet Dr. Campbell. He arrived at their house at the appointed time. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair and kind but penetrating eyes. He immediately gave them the impression of a man who had seen a lot and knew a lot. They showed him into the living room. Dr. Campbell looked around the room slowly, his gaze lingering on the mirror. He walked over to it, ran his hand along the frame, carefully examined the dark glass. "Yes," he said in a low voice. "I remember that mirror. It always gave me a strange feeling, even when I was investigating the Blackwood house." Sarah and Daniel told him everything, from buying the mirror at the fair to the most recent, most disturbing events. They showed him a photo of Alice. Dr. Campbell listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. He did not appear skeptical, but he did not jump to conclusions either. When they had finished, he thought, "That's interesting and disturbing. I've heard of mirrors that are said to hold energy traces or even souls, especially if they have witnessed strong emotions or tragic events." He explained that, according to some theories, certain materials can remember energetic imprints, and glass, especially old glass, could have such properties. If we add to this the possible use of occult practices, then the mirror could become a kind of resonator or even a portal. "The photograph of Alice is strong evidence," he said. "It is not just a reflection. It seems to be a picture of her spirit trapped in the mirror." He suggested that the mirror, having witnessed Alice's death, Mrs. Blackwood's grief, and her attempts to contact her daughter, absorbed these strong emotions and, perhaps, a part of Alice's soul. And later, perhaps, the souls of other family members who suffered in this house. "This mirror seems to be a trap for souls," he said. "It holds them, and now that it is in your house, their energy begins to manifest." Sarah and Daniel listened in horror. They had not just bought an antique, but a prison for souls. "What can we do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "How can we stop this?" Dr. Campbell sighed. "That's a difficult question. If the mirror is indeed a portal or a trap, getting rid of it may not be enough. The souls may be tied to it or to the place, or perhaps they are looking for a way out." He suggested several possible options. First, try to make contact with the spirits in the mirror. Perhaps they want something that will help them find peace. Second, try to cleanse the mirror of negative energy. And third, if all else fails, find a way to safely destroy the mirror, although that might be dangerous. "The most important thing now," he said, "is to figure out what's going on. I can help you with that. I have equipment that can measure paranormal activity. We can try to make contact." Sarah and Daniel were scared, but also relieved. They had finally found someone who believed them and who could help. They accepted Dr. Campbell's offer. Over the next few days, Dr. Campbell conducted research in their home. He set up cameras, motion sensors, and electromagnetic field meters. He also brought a device that he said could record electronic voice phenomena, EVP, the voices of spirits that are inaudible to the human ear. The results were startling. The cameras recorded the movement of shadows, especially near the mirror. The sensors showed sharp changes in temperature and electromagnetic fields in the living room. And the EVP recordings contained strange, barely audible sounds, whispers, moans, even a child's laughter, which sounded eerily eerie in the silence of the recording. One night, while they were conducting an EVP session in the living room, they heard a clear, albeit soft voice that seemed to be coming from the mirror. The voice was childish, sad. It said just one word: "Mom." Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. It was the voice of Alice Blackwood. She was trapped in the mirror, searching for her mother. Dr. Campbell was shocked. It's really her. She's trapped, and she seems to be suffering. They realized that their problem wasn't just that the house was haunted. The problem was that the mirror held unhappy souls who couldn't find peace, and maybe they needed their help. The next step, Dr. Campbell advised, was to try to understand what these souls wanted, especially Alice's soul. Perhaps her mother had done something to trap her in the mirror. Perhaps she needed help to break free. This opened up new, even more dangerous possibilities. Making contact with spirits could be unpredictable. They didn't know what other entities might be trapped in the mirror besides Alice, and whether they were all as innocent as her voice. But they felt they couldn't just ignore the child's suffering. They decided to take a chance. They were willing to try to help the souls trapped in the dark glass. This step led them to delve even deeper into the secrets of the Blackwood Mirror. Secrets that might turn out to be much darker than they could have imagined.
Part 4. Voices from the Darkness. The decision to try to make contact with the souls trapped in the mirror was not an easy one. Fear was intertwined with a sense of duty to help. Alice's voice, whispering "Mom," awakened deep compassion in Sarah. She could not simply ignore the child's suffering. Daniel, although more cautious, also felt that they could not simply leave it at that. Dr. Campbell became their guide in this unknown world. He explained that communicating with spirits is a complex and unpredictable process. It requires patience, openness, and caution. He also warned that not all entities may be benevolent. Some may be evil, confused, or even dangerous. They decided to begin by cautiously attempting to make contact, using methods that Dr. Campbell considered the safest. They used an EVP recorder, asking simple questions and allowing time for the spirits to respond. They also tried using a spirit board, Ouija board, although Dr. Campbell was wary of this method, considering it less reliable and potentially more dangerous. The first few sessions were disappointing. They recorded hours of silence, only occasionally hearing faint, incomprehensible noises or distortions on the EVP recordings. The spirit board remained motionless. But they did not give up. They held their sessions every night, sitting in front of a mirror in the living room, lit only by soft candlelight to reduce reflections and, according to Dr. Campbell, create a more conducive atmosphere for the spirits to manifest. Gradually, their efforts began to bear fruit. The EVP recordings became clearer. In addition to moans and whispers, they began to hear individual words or phrases that sounded as if they were being squeezed out of deep suffering. "Dark," a female voice whispered. "Cold," another added. "Help," a child's voice called out, making Sarah flinch. The spirit board also began to move. Slowly, uncertainly, the pointer began to slide over the letters, forming words. They were broken, confused messages. Lost. Pain. Prison. This confirmed Dr. Campbell's theory that the mirror was a trap. The souls were lost, suffering, and seemed to be aware of their imprisonment. They tried to focus on Alice. They addressed her by name, asking what had happened, what she wanted. One evening during an EVP session, they heard her voice again. It was a little louder than before and sounded more desperate. "Mom, angry. The mirror hurts. I can't get out." These words made Sarah feel deeply sorry for the girl. What had her mother done? Why did the mirror hurt? Dr. Campbell suggested that Mrs. Blackwood, in her grief, might have tried to do something to keep Alice's spirit close to her, using the mirror. Perhaps she was performing some rituals that had inadvertently or intentionally imprisoned her daughter. They decided to try to learn more about Mrs. Blackwood's rituals. Sarah returned to her research, looking for any mention of her occult practices. She found a few vague references to her interest in spiritualism and her attempts to contact the dead. But there were no specific details about the rituals associated with the mirror. Meanwhile, the situation in the house was deteriorating. The manifestations were becoming more aggressive. The shadows moved faster, whispers turned into ominous laughter, and moans turned into screams. Sometimes they felt as if someone was pushing or touching them. One night, while Sarah was sleeping, she had a terrible dream. She found herself in the living room in front of a mirror. In its dark glass, she saw not only Alice, but also other faces, distorted, evil, looking at her with hatred. They reached out to her, trying to grab her. She woke up screaming, her body shaking. She realized that the mirror was not only filled with unhappy souls, there was something else there, something dark and evil. Dr. Campbell confirmed her fears. When a portal or trap opens, it can attract more than just the souls that were trapped there. It can attract other entities as well. Some of them can be negative or even demonic. He suggested that Mrs. Blackwood's rituals may have opened up something more than she had anticipated. Perhaps she had attracted dark forces that were now using the mirror as a way into their world. That changed the situation. It was now not just a matter of helping lost souls, but also a matter of protecting herself from something evil. They decided to try to make contact with the other entities in the mirror to understand who they were and what they wanted. It was a risky move, but they felt they needed to know what they were dealing with. During the next EVP session, they asked, "Who else is here?" The answer was immediate and terrifying. A clear, low, ominous voice came through the recording. "We are waiting. Your souls belong to us." Sarah and Daniel felt their blood run cold. It wasn't a human voice. It was something else. Something ancient and evil. The spirit board also began to move faster, more aggressively. The pointer slid chaotically across the board, forming words that expressed hatred and threats. "Get out! Tight! Our home." They realized that the mirror wasn't just the Blackwood souls. There were other entities there that seemed to consider the mirror their property and did not want anyone to interfere. Dr. Campbell was concerned. These are not just remnants of energy. These are intelligent entities, and they are hostile. He explained that these entities could be tied to the mirror or to a place, or they could use the mirror as a portal to enter their world. Whatever the reason, they were dangerous. "We need to be very careful," he said. "These entities could be trying to influence you, manipulate you, or even cause you physical harm." They decided to temporarily stop direct contact and focus on finding ways to protect themselves. Dr. Campbell suggested several methods for cleansing the house and protecting it from negative energy. They used herbs, candles, prayers, and other rituals that he said could help. But that did not stop the manifestations. The hostility from the mirror was growing. Objects moved on their own. Doors opened and closed, and the house was constantly haunted by the presence of something evil. One evening, when Daniel was alone in the living room, he saw a vague figure standing behind him in the mirror. He turned sharply, but no one was there. Then he heard a low, ominous laugh that seemed to come from the depths of the mirror. Fear reached its peak. Sarah and Daniel understood that they could not live in such conditions for long. They needed to find a way to get rid of the mirror, or at least neutralize its power. Dr. Campbell suggested that they try to find information about how the mirror was created. Perhaps there was some element in its creation that could be used to destroy or deactivate it. Sarah plunged into research again, searching for any mention of the Blackwood mirror's origins. She looked through old trade records, antique collectors, and even looked for information on ancient mirror-making methods. Her search led her to an old, forgotten book on occult artifacts. It contained a brief mention of soul mirrors, rare and dangerous objects that, according to legend, could hold souls. The book described how such mirrors were created through dark rituals that involved the use of blood and other impure elements, and that they were extremely difficult to destroy, often requiring the same dark rituals or the use of certain elements that had been used to create them. This information was horrifying, but it gave them new insight. The Blackwood mirror was not just an antique, but a powerful, dangerous artifact. They told Dr. Campbell about it. He confirmed that he had heard of soul mirrors. According to him, they were very rare and dangerous objects, often associated with dark magic. "If this is indeed a soul mirror," he said, "then destroying it will be very difficult, and it could be dangerous. It could release all the entities that are trapped in it, and then you would be dealing not only with the mirror, but with all of them." They were trapped. They could not live with the mirror, but it was dangerous to get rid of it. Dr. Campbell offered them a last resort. Try to find a way to seal the mirror. Create a barrier that would not allow the entities to escape and would not allow them to manifest. It would not solve the problem of the trapped souls, but it could ensure their safety. It was their only chance, they agreed. The next step was to research how to seal such a powerful artifact. This required knowledge of ancient rituals, symbols, and perhaps the use of some special elements. Their journey into the supernatural world became even more dangerous. They were stepping into territory where the line between reality and nightmare was becoming increasingly blurred, and they did not know if they would be able to emerge unscathed. Part 5: Sealing and Confrontation. The decision to attempt to seal the mirror became a ray of hope for Sarah and Daniel in the darkness that surrounded them. It was a risky move, but they felt they had no other choice. Living in a house where evil was peering out of the mirror was impossible. Dr. Campbell became their guide in this complex and dangerous process. He explained that sealing such a powerful artifact as the Mirror of Souls would require not only knowledge of ancient rituals, but also strong will and concentration. It was not just a physical act, but rather an energetic and spiritual one. They began to research ancient texts and occult works in search of information about sealing rituals. Dr. Campbell had access to rare books and manuscripts that contained references to such practices. They studied symbols, spells, and elements used to create barriers against supernatural forces. Their research revealed that there were several ways to seal, but they all required the use of certain materials that were believed to have protective properties. These included herbs, minerals, symbols written in special ink, and most importantly, a strong concentration of intention and energy. They decided to use a combination of methods that seemed most suitable to them. They gathered herbs such as wormwood and sage, which were believed to ward off evil spirits. They sought out quartz crystals, which were believed to enhance positive energy and create protective barriers. Dr. Campbell prepared a special ink from natural ingredients that was used to write the protective symbols. The preparation process was exhausting and stressful. Fear and anxiety did not leave them. They knew that the closer they got to sealing, the stronger the resistance from the entities in the mirror would be. The manifestations in the house became even more intense. The mirror seemed to radiate dark energy. The images in it became clearer and more threatening. They saw distorted faces screaming without sound, hands reaching out from the darkness, trying to grab them. One night, as they prepared for the ritual, the house became completely chaotic. Objects flew around the room, doors slammed, windows rattled. They heard ominous laughter coming from all corners of the house, as if the entities were trying to break their will. Sarah and Daniel were scared, but they didn't give up. They held together, supporting each other. Dr. Campbell remained calm, guiding them and reminding them of the importance of concentration. Finally, the day of the sealing ritual arrived. They decided to perform it at night when, according to legend, the line between the worlds is thinner. They cleared the living room, set out candles, and laid out the prepared materials. The atmosphere in the room was tense. The air seemed thick with negative energy. The mirror looked darker than ever, like a black hole in space. Dr. Campbell began the ritual. He recited ancient spells, drawing symbols in the air using a lit bundle of herbs. Sarah and Daniel stood side by side, holding quartz crystals, focusing on their intention to seal the mirror. As Dr. Campbell approached the mirror to draw protective symbols on it with special ink, the activity in the house reached its peak. The ground beneath their feet trembled as if from an earthquake. A strong gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. A terrible scream escaped from the mirror, forcing them to cover their ears. Images began to appear from the dark glass. These were not only the faces of Alice and the other imprisoned souls, but also dark, distorted figures that radiated evil. They reached out to them, their eyes glowing red. "You can't seal us," an ominous voice came from the mirror. "This house is ours." Sarah felt fear paralyze her, but then she saw Alice's face in the mirror. The girl looked at her with a pleading look, as if asking for help. It gave Sarah strength. She remembered their original desire to help lost souls. "We don't want to hurt you," she shouted to the mirror. "We want to help you find peace." The evil entities responded only with sinister laughter. They did not want peace. They wanted to inflict pain. Dr. Campbell, despite the chaos, continued the ritual. He quickly drew symbols on the surface of the mirror. The symbols glowed with a pale blue light, as if pure energy resisted the darkness. When he was finished, he raised his hands and uttered a final incantation. "Forces of light, protect this place. Seal this portal. May those within find peace and evil be banished." At the moment he uttered these words, a powerful stream of dark energy burst from the mirror. It struck Dr. Campbell, throwing him back. Sarah and Daniel rushed to him. He was pale, but alive. The mirror trembled as if something inside it was struggling. The images within it flickered, becoming increasingly distorted, and then began to disappear. The dark glass seemed to draw the light into itself, growing darker still. Then there was a final, terrible scream that seemed to come from deep within the mirror itself. A scream that was a mixture of pain, anger, and despair. And then there was silence. Absolute eerie silence. The activity in the house ceased. Objects stopped moving, doors fell silent. The air became clearer, lighter. Sarah and Daniel looked cautiously at the mirror. It still hung on the wall, but it looked different now. The dark glass had become opaque, as if a thick fog had engulfed it. The symbols Dr. Campbell had drawn still glowed with a pale blue light on its surface. Did we do this?" Sarah whispered. Dr. Campbell rose to his feet, breathing heavily. "I think so. We sealed it. We created a barrier that wouldn't let the entities out, and hopefully wouldn't let them manifest." He explained that sealing it hadn't destroyed the mirror or freed the souls. They were still there, trapped in the dark glass, but now they were separated from their world. "It's not a perfect solution," he said. "The souls are still trapped, but at least you're safe. And maybe in time, as the energy in the mirror weakens, they can find peace." Sarah and Daniel felt relieved, but also sad. They hadn't been able to fully help the souls, especially Alice, but they had saved themselves. They decided to leave the mirror where it was. They wrapped it in a thick cloth so that no one would accidentally see it and try to unseal it. They also decided to never again hold EVP sessions in the living room. Life in the house began to return to normal. The fear gradually receded. They still felt a slight unease when they passed the living room, but the manifestations had stopped. Dr. Campbell continued to maintain contact with them. He visited them from time to time, checking for new signs of paranormal activity. Over time, the symbols on the mirror began to fade. The dark glass remained opaque, but the feeling of an ominous presence near it diminished. Sarah and Daniel learned to live with their secret. They knew that there was an artifact in their house that kept dark secrets, but they also knew that they could confront it and protect themselves. Sometimes in the silence of the night, Sarah thought she heard a soft whisper coming from the living room. A whisper that was a mixture of voices, children's, women's, men's. A whisper that was the echo of souls trapped in the dark glass. She hoped that in time these souls would find peace, and that their story would be a lesson to others, a lesson about the dangers of antiques with dark pasts, a lesson that some secrets are best left unsolved. But they knew that the story of the Blackwood Mirror might never be completely over. Its echo would always linger in their home, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind ordinary things. Epilogue: The echo remains. Sarah and Daniel's lives after the Blackwood's mirror sealing ritual never quite returned to normal. Although the active apparitions ceased and the house ceased to be a scene of paranormal activity, the feeling of something else's presence never completely disappeared. The living room, where the sealed mirror hung, became a place they tried to avoid. The mirror, wrapped in a thick cloth, looked like an eerie monument to their nightmare. They never removed the cloth, afraid to see what was hidden beneath it. The symbols drawn by Dr. Campbell eventually disappeared completely, but the dark, opaque glass remained. Sometimes, walking past the living room at night, Sarah or Daniel would feel a slight chill or hear a soft, barely audible whisper. It wasn't as aggressive and threatening as before, but more like a distant echo, a reminder that the souls were still there. They continued to keep in touch with Dr. Campbell. He became not only a counselor for them, but also a friend who understood what they had been through. He explained that sealing such a powerful artifact creates a barrier, but does not destroy its energy. The souls still exist in another dimension connected to the mirror, and sometimes their echoes can penetrate their world. It's like a radio station that still works, but with a very weak signal, he explained. You can sometimes hear it, but it can't affect you like it used to. Sarah and Daniel realized that they would have to learn to live with it. They accepted the fact that their house had its dark history, and that part of that history would always be there. They rarely told anyone about what had happened. Those who had not experienced something like this would hardly understand them. They found support in each other, in their shared trauma and common experience. Sarah stopped looking for answers in old books on the occult. She had gained enough knowledge about the dark side of the world. She focused on her work, on creating beautiful things, on what brought her joy. Daniel also returned to his usual life, but his view of the world had changed. He became more careful, more attentive to incomprehensible things. He knew that not everything could be explained by logic and science. Over time, they began to think about the future. They wanted to start a family, have children. But the thought of their children living in a house with a mirror of souls caused them anxiety. They discussed the possibility of selling the house. But how can you sell a house knowing that it contains a dangerous artifact? They couldn't risk the safety of others. They decided to stay. They realized that it was their duty to watch over the mirror so that no one else would fall victim to it. They became the guardians of this dark secret. They arranged the living room so that the mirror would be less noticeable. They placed a large bookcase in front of it, completely hiding it. It was symbolic, knowledge and culture opposed to darkness and the unknown. Life went on. They got married, they had children. The children grew up in the house not knowing about its dark secret. They played in the living room, near the bookcase, not suspecting that behind it was a portal to another dimension. Sometimes, when the children were small, they asked about the shadows they saw in the house. Sarah and Daniel replied that it was just a play of light, or that it seemed to them. They tried to protect them from the truth, from the fear they had experienced. But the echo remained. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, Sarah could still hear the soft whispers coming from behind the bookcase. Whispers that were a reminder of Alice, of other imprisoned souls, of dark entities waiting in the darkness. She knew that the mirror would never completely lose its power. It was part of the history of the house, part of their history, and that echo would always be with them, a reminder that the world is not as simple as it seems, and that some secrets can be hidden in the most unexpected places. And so, Sarah and Daniel lived their lives with a dark secret hidden behind the bookcase. They were happy as could be, but they were always aware of the echoes that came from the dark glass. The echoes of souls seeking peace, and the echoes of evil that waited their time. The end.